Hi there, this is Mr. Jones, and I'd like to help you with congruent figures. Now remember, congruent figures have the same size, same shape. And that means that all of their corresponding sides and all of their corresponding angles are congruent. It's very important when you're naming the congruents that the corresponding vertices must be named in the same order. Okay, so for example, I've drawn two triangles for you, and you can see in the illustration which angles are congruent. In other words, angle B and angle E are congruent. Angle A and angle D are congruent. Angle C and angle F are congruent. Okay, so in the triangle shown, why don't you see if you can name the congruents? Okay, name the way that the triangles are congruent, and when you're ready, go ahead and hit continue. Well, it's important to understand that it really makes no difference which triangle I begin with and which angle in the triangle I begin with. So if I name the first triangle ABC, then what I need to make sure is when I name the second triangle that I name them in the order in which they correspond. So since angle A corresponds to D, I'm going to begin the second triangle with D, but B corresponds to E, so I'm going to then go to E and then last to F. F corresponds to C. Okay? Now you could have begun with a different triangle or with a different vertex. Okay, so for example, if you had begun your triangle by naming it triangle BAC, there's nothing wrong with that. But then that would be congruent to triangle. Right? B corresponds to E, A corresponds to D, and C corresponds to F. Okay, so you would have named your triangles like so. All right? Well, let's look at a second example then. These are pentagons rather than triangles. And you're given that triangle or pentagon, space, S-P-A-C-E, is congruent to triangle, to pentagon, D-T-R-W-B. All right? And then you're asked to find the measure of angle B. You're not given much information about the angles of pentagon DTRWB other than you have two right angles. Right? But you do know that since this pentagon corresponds to and is congruent to the pentagon to its left, you can find out what you need to know about those angles and then relate them to the second pentagon. Okay? Well, what do you know about the angles, the interior angles of a pentagon? Of course, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. So hopefully you recall that the sum of the angles in a polygon is the number of sides minus 2 times 180. Okay? So in this case, since n is equal to 5, it's a pentagon, I can substitute 5 in place of n. 5 minus 2 times 180. 5 minus 2 is 3. 3 times 180 is 540 degrees. Okay, for the sum of all the interior angles. Well, the two right angles add up to 180 degrees, 90 plus 90, 180, plus one of the angles, 132, plus 88. And the sum of all of those angles is 400 degrees. All right? Well, notice the only angle that I don't know is angle E, so the measure of angle E plus 400 degrees is equal to 540 degrees. Okay, the sum of all the interior angles is 540. So subtract 400 from each side of the equation, and the measure of angle E must equal 140 degrees. Right, and you'll notice in the way that I have named the correspondence and the congruence that angle E corresponds to and therefore must be congruent to angle B. So I now know that the measure of angle B, that the measure of angle B must be 140 degrees. Okay? Well, I think that should give you the tips that you need and the understanding. So